Hello, everyone. Welcome to Module 7. This week, we are focusing on influencer marketing and, more specifically, how to find the right voice for your brand. When we hear the word influencer, we often immediately think about celebrities or people with millions of followers. But as we'll discuss throughout this lecture, influence is much more than popularity. The goal is not simply to find someone with a large audience. The goal is to identify people who can credibly connect your brand with the audience you are trying to reach. By the end of this lecture, you should have a better understanding of how to find and evaluate influencers, how to approach them, and how to develop influencer partnerships that support your overall social media strategy. Before we get into influencer marketing, let's think about where we are in the development of our social media strategy. We started by establishing goals. What exactly are we trying to accomplish? We then spent time defining our target audience because we need to know who we are trying to reach. More recently, we looked at content and social sharing and considered what makes people want to engage with and share a message. Now we're adding another piece to the strategy: influence. The question becomes, who can help us credibly carry that message to the audience we want to reach? Notice that we're not starting with an influencer, we're starting with our goals and our audience. That distinction is going to be very important throughout this module. So, why have influencers become such an important part of social media strategy? One reason is that influencers allow brands to extend their messages into communities that the brand may not be able to reach as effectively on its own. Think about the difference between a company telling you that its product is wonderful and someone you already follow, trust, or identify with telling you about that same product. Those messages may be received very differently. Influencers can bring a human voice to a brand message. They can demonstrate a product, tell a story, provide a recommendation, or introduce the brand within an existing conversation. When the partnership is appropriate, influencers can help support awareness, engagement, credibility, traffic, and even conversion. But the key phrase here is when the partnership is appropriate. This brings us to one of the most important ideas in this lecture. Influence is more than follower count. It is very easy to look at two potential influencers and automatically assume that the person with the larger audience is more valuable. That is not necessarily true. We also need to consider relevance. Is this person relevant to our brand and the campaign? We need to consider credibility. Does the audience trust this person? What does the engagement look like? And most importantly, is this the audience that we actually want to reach? A creator with 30,000 highly engaged followers who closely match your target audience may be much more strategically valuable than someone with 3 million followers who have very little interest in your product. So, it's important not to confuse reach with influence. Influencers are commonly grouped into tiers based on the size of their audiences. You will generally see categories such as nano, micro, macro, and mega or celebrity influencers. One thing I want you to remember is that the exact follower members associated with these categories can vary depending on the source and the platform. So I don't want you to become overly focused on memorizing a particular number. Instead, think about what these categories tell us strategically. Nano and micro influencers tend to have smaller audiences, but those audiences may be more focused and connected to a particular community or interest. Macro and mega influencers provide much greater reach, but they may also require substantially larger budgets. The question is not which tier is best. The question is which tier makes the most sense for this particular campaign. When selecting an influencer tier, there are several things you need to consider. First is reach. How many people could potentially see the content? But then we have relevance. Are those actually the people we need to reach? We also need to think about cost. A celebrity partnership could consume a significant portion of a campaign budget, while working with smaller content creators might allow a brand to reach multiple niche communities. Accessibility matters as well. Larger influencers may have agents, managers, formal contracts, and more complex partnership requirements. And finally, you must consider engagement. This is why influencer selection has to return to your strategy. Your audience, your objectives, and your budget should help determine which type of influencer makes sense. I also want to make an important distinction between an influencer and a brand advocate. An influencer or creator may collaborate with your brand because the partnership makes sense for their audience, their content, or their business. They may not have had previous relationship with your brand. A brand advocate, on the other hand, already has some type of genuine connection to the brand. This could be a loyal customer, an employee, an industry expert, or even a community member who regularly recommends your products. The existing relationship can be extremely valuable because advocacy can feel organic and authentic. This doesn't mean one is automatically better than the other. It means we need to recognize that these are different types of relationships and think strategically about how each can contribute to the brand. So, where do we actually find influencers? Start by listening. Who is already driving conversations related to your industry? Who is creating content about the issues, products, or interests that matter to your audience? You can search relevant platforms, hashtags, keywords, brand mentions, or conversations. You might also discover potential influencers among customers, employees, journalists, experts, or people already engaging with your content. One thing from my earlier lectures that I still want you to remember is that you should pay attention to who is already talking about you or your category. Sometimes the right influencer is not someone you have to discover through a sophisticated platform. They may already be participating in the conversation. When evaluating an influencer, don't just research the influencer, research the people who follow them. Who are they? Where are they located? What are they interested in? What do they value? What kinds of posts generate meaningful conversations? This is where the work you completed earlier in the semester on demographics and psychographics become important. If your audience and the influencer's audience do not align, the partnership may generate a lot of exposure without generating the right exposure. Always ask yourself, Does this creator give us credible access to the people we actually need to reach? Now we can evaluate influencer fit more systematically. First, look at audience relevance. Does the influencer reach the people you identified as your target? Next, examine engagement. And don't just look at the engagement rate, look at the actual conversations taking place. Consider credibility. Does this person appear knowledgeable or trustworthy within the particular space? Then look at content fit. Would your brand naturally make sense within the type of content this person creates? And finally, consider performance. If possible, look at previous partnerships and determine whether there is evidence that this creator can help you achieve your particular objective. This is why we have to look beyond the numbers. Follower count and engagement rates can certainly provide useful information, but quantitative data should be combined with qualitative evaluation. Read the comments. Are people actually engaging with the content? Or are you seeing generic responses that don't suggest meaningful interaction? Look at consistency. Does the influencer regularly receive meaningful engagement, or did one post simply perform unusually well? Look at previous partnerships. Does the creator promote a different brand every day? Are those brands consistent with the image they have built? You should also be aware of unusual patterns that could indicate inflated followers or low quality engagement. Numbers provide only a part of the story. Your job as a strategist is to investigate the rest. Another important consideration is brand alignment. Before entering into a partnership, review the influencer's content history, public voice, values, previous partnerships, and overall reputation. Ask yourself whether this person is someone your brand wants to be associated with. You should also identify potential conflicts. For example, are they currently working with a competitor? Have they recently promoted something that actually contradicts your brand's values or positioning? Influencer marketing involves transferring some of your brand visibility to another person. That means their reputation can affect your reputation. So, vetting influencers is not simply about determining whether they can generate attention, it is also about managing potential risk. We also need to understand what motivates influencers. Compensation is obviously one possibility, and influencer marketing has become a significant business. But money is not the only motivation. Some creators may value early access to products. Others may be interested in recognition, creative opportunities, professional growth, experiences, or partnerships with organizations that align with causes they care about. Understanding motivation helps you develop a partnership that creates values for both sides. Instead of asking only, what can this influencer do for my brand? You also need to ask, why would this influencer want to work with us? Remember, strong partnerships should make sense for both parties. Now, before you ever send an email or direct message, do your research. And I don't mean looking at the influencer's most recent Instagram post and deciding that they seem like a good fit. Review several pieces of content, look across platforms when appropriate, understand their tone, their topics, their audience, and the types of partnerships they have accepted in the past. Read the comments from their followers. Those comments can tell you quite a bit about the community. You should also determine whether the influencer has a management company, a business contract, or specific guidelines for partnerships. The more research you do before making contact, the more personalized and professional your outreach can be. Another point that's imperative is that your first interaction with an influencer should not necessarily be, "Hi, would you promote my product?" When appropriate, begin developing familiarity with their work, follow their content, engage authentically. If you comment, make sure the comment actually contributes something. You're not pitching in the comments. The goal is to understand the creator and the community they've built. Remember that influencers have spent time developing relationships with their audiences. That audience is part of their professional value. Approach the relationship with respect for their time, their expertise, and the trust they have developed with their community. Eventually, you will need to make the pitch. Your pitch should be clear, concise, professional, and personalized. Use the influencer's name, explain who you are and why you are contacting this particular person. This is where your research should become visible. There should be something in your message that demonstrates that you actually know their work. Then explain the opportunity clearly. What are you proposing? Why would it make sense for their audience? What are you asking them to do? Avoid sending a generic message to 100 creators and simply changing the name at the top. Influencers receive partnership requests regularly, and generic outreach is very easy to recognize. There are several elements that should appear in an effective pitch. Begin with a personalized introduction, then explain the collaboration opportunity and why you believe there is a good fit. Be specific about the action that you want the influencer to take. Are you asking for a reel, a TikTok video, a product review, attendance at an event, a series of posts? You also need to communicate what you are offering in return. Include relevant dates and next steps so that the influencer understands the timeline. And keep the pitch focused. Your influencer probably does not need 3 paragraphs about the history of your company. Include the information that matters to this partnership only. Once an influencer is interested, both parties need to be very clear about expectations. What exactly will the influencer receive? Is this a paid partnership? Are you providing products, access, travel, or some other form of compensation? Then define the deliverables. How many pieces of content? Which platforms? What formats? Establish deadlines. Discuss whether the brand will have an approval process and what that process looks like. Usage rights are also important. Can the brand reuse the influencer's content on its own channels or in its advertising? These details should not be based on assumptions. They should be clearly communicated and documented so that everyone understands the agreement. Transparency is a critical part of influencer marketing. If an influencer has a material connection with a brand, that relationship should be clearly disclosed to the audience. And remember that a material connection does not necessarily mean that the influencer received the paycheck. It could include free products, gifts, discounts, travel, or other benefits. The important question is whether there is a relationship that could affect how the audience interprets the endorsement. As you review the FTC resource for this module, pay close attention to what constitutes a material connection and how disclosures should be presented. Transparency protects audiences, but it also contributes to credibility. Trying to hide the relationship can ultimately damage both the creator and the brand. Finally, how do we know whether an influencer partnership worked? We go back to something we discussed much earlier in the semester: your SMART objectives and KPIs. If the objectives were awareness, you might examine reach, impressions, or video views. If the objective was engagement, you may look at comments, shares, saves, or other meaningful interactions. If you were trying to drive action, you might measure clicks, referral traffic, conversions, or sales. You might also evaluate sentiment and the quality of the audience response. The important point is that you should not evaluate an influencer partnership simply by saying, the post received a lot of likes. Your metrics should connect directly to the objective you established. So, as we close this module, remember that successful influencer marketing is not about finding the most popular person you can afford. It is about finding the right person for the right audience for the right objective. Do your research, evaluate fit carefully, build professional relationships, be transparent about partnerships, and as always, measure your results against the goals you established. Thank you guys for listening. Catch you on the next one.